How can INFJs remain humble if it's easy to fall for the temptations of a big ego? It's a question that was asked by a viewer, CL Strife. I thank her for that question. It's an opportunity for me to return the question of humility, the role that humility plays in human life. In this video, as in much of my work, through the prism of the experience we call the INFJ experience, the experience of people for whom the description of the INFJ personality is deeply resonant. So that's a big family with different types of people, different subtypes, different subfamilies. But I do believe that there are some key themes that have to do with humility and the challenges around it, what's at stake, and the benefits of knowing how to navigate that problematic issue that are worth exploring in more detail maybe than previously. So first of all, there's a couple of misunderstandings I think about this question. If you hang out on the internet, because primarily people who are interested in personality type are aggregated as a community on the internet. You'll find people outside the internet that on an individual basis, you get to know them, you realize they're interested in personality, but not really communities that are tightly knit enough to interact with each other on a regular basis, have a cyclical kind of relationship, and so forth. And so you'll encounter two types of people when they talk about INFJs, not INFJs talking about themselves. There are types of people who will say something, and I'm going to simplify slightly. They'll say something like, INFJs are not humble enough. And you'll have people who say about INFJs that INFJs are too humble, they're too meek, they're too demure, and they don't really put themselves out there enough. They lack confidence, don't trust themselves enough. They're worth more than that, and perhaps they're not allowing themselves to reach their whole potential. So seemingly quite opposed perspectives. The perspective of those who say that INFJs are too humble and INFJs who think that INFJs are not humble enough. Now, when it comes to how INFJs feel about themselves, my impression is that the majority of INFJs I interact with don't seem to think that they lack humility. But this might not be reflective of a specifically INFJ experience. As for anybody in the world, regardless of their type, it's easier to gloss over your areas of vulnerability than to talk about them. And so I think that happens in the case of INFJs. Because one of my fundamental insights really in relation to the question of humility is that in the INFJ experience, often the issue, when you go deep, you dig deeper than the superficial layers of what looks like INFJs being kind of private, reserved, a little bit shy, not keen to step forward. You dig a bit deeper and you realize that's not really humility. In fact, it could be an absence of enough humility. Retreat into the NI world could be really construed as an absence of enough humility. Humility, could be described as the acceptance that one is just going to lead an existence that is average, that is, maybe some great things will happen, maybe they will not. But there's no assumption that there's a great destiny ahead for the person and that the person will do their best. The person won't tend to relate to others as if these others are not, achieving as much as they are or don't have as much potential as they do. And the thing about the INFJ is that INFJs rarely have a very kind of pretentious and arrogant outward behavior. That is true. So it's not often the case that an INFJ comes across to other people as particularly arrogant, pretentious, or lacking in humility. But when you get to know the INFJ mind a bit more, what you start noticing is that often what INFJs suffer from can be construed, at least in one respect, as a difficulty with accepting a humble destiny, if it might be phrased like that. Now, oftentimes that has its origin in the fact that a lot of INFJs have had somewhat difficult childhoods. Maybe not necessarily difficult in the sense that like their parents were awful or their siblings were awful, that they were neglected. No, sometimes just in the sense that they may have been a little bit different with different needs than maybe their siblings or just other kids. Maybe that was not entirely picked up by caregivers, and caregivers, you can understand why it's not easy also for caregivers to quite know what to do with people who have the particular sensitivities of INFJs. But regardless, INFJs often in childhood end up feeling that there are sort of not really meeting expectations. And because the expectations are, to use a slightly simplistic phrase, often just neurotypical expectations, sociotypical expectations, and often they're not typical in that way. Now, a common mechanism of defense for children who experience this is the compensation of the superego, particularly through the inflation of that part that's folded into the superego but becomes detached from it after the age of 6 or 7, which is called the ego ideal. And that represents the mostly unconscious, but can be brought to consciousness with effort, personification of what we would like to be. And implied in this is that there is a possibility of attaining this even if it takes a long time. The ego ideal is who we imagine ourselves to ideally be in the future. And that acts as a counterpart to actual ego vulnerabilities that are present in the here and now of even the INFJ child. And so what often happens is something I've noticed is that INFJs tend to have very developed ego ideals, sometimes very inflated ego ideals, because the level of inflation points to the amount of compensation they had to do for how much their young egos were subjected to difficulties and misunderstandings and lack of empathy in some respects. So the origin is in a certain form of suffering, and the ego ideal is a form of adaptation for INFJs, and they can always think in terms of, well, but I could achieve this. And you can also really see how the INFJ vocabulary provides them with further tools to conceptualize this, namely, often in the case of the NI vision. And so an INFJ might tell themselves, well, I'm not really understood because I speak in symbols, I speak in metaphors, but at some point I'll be able to realize this vision, and this vision is going to be quite revolutionary in its own way. I'm looking ahead, I'm thinking ahead, people can't really understand me, but it's all happening in my NI world, and one day it'll be noticed. And you know what? If it is not noticed, perhaps it's because it's not meant to be understood by these mere mortals. I'm exaggerating, I'm laying it on thick a little bit, but that's the idea. And you can sense that there's a lack of what might be called NI humility in this, and a desire to protect their NI because they don't think that their NI ought to be contaminated. And that can be a source of anguish, because the more an INFJ does this, the more they will decide to favor the NI world at the expense of external reality, and therefore the less they will put themselves in a position where they may be able to thrive in external reality, and therefore they'll be exposing themselves more and more to the return of the real life situations that stress them. I mean, they don't mature in the external world. They won't develop like mature defenses and coping mechanisms to be able to deal with those situations. But in order to reconnect to the external world, you also need to appreciate that as a person, you're most likely not going to be exceptional. You are unique, and it's important to understand that you are unique. And the more authentic you are, the more your uniqueness will be translated across to other people and to yourself. But, the idea that every INFJ has the destiny to be revolutionary, the idea that every INFJ has the potential to do like world historical things, it's just wrong. It's just not going to happen. And coming to terms with that is difficult for INFJs. One of the reasons being all what I already said. It's a threat to their often relatively vulnerable ego defenses, which is why the ego ideal is inflated. But also because a lot of this stuff is unconscious, subjected to reaction formation. So often INFJs will tell you, What are you talking about? No, I don't have these ideals for myself. I want to be accepted. I want to be this. I want to be that. But often, in terms of their everyday behavior, you get the sense that there is a protectiveness about what they consider to be the inner world as the kingdom, as the realm where they can develop, relatively safeguarded from external reality, as a realm that is more corrupt, the realm of mere mortals. And using this kind of metaphorical language helps you to get a grip on what is taking place unconsciously in the minds of INFJs. And it's no surprise that a lot of the time the INFJs who are in fact the most legitimately humble are the spiritual INFJs, or the secure INFJs, and the spiritualized INFJs. They tend to be more humble than the solipsistic INFJ, and the reasons here are obvious, because solipsistic INFJs tend to have a slightly, I don't want to say megalomaniac, but they do invest the inner world massively and consider that they are self-sufficient in that respect. But even compliant INFJs, insofar as they are aware that they're complying to keep others at bay, they are not letting these others approach them. They are defending themselves against the others because they want to preserve themselves. From what? In some sense, from the contamination of the everyday world. Learning to trust the everyday world is also a way to learn to really be humble. Let me know in the comments what you think. Perhaps this will be a controversial video, I don't know, but I wanted to share these thoughts. Don't forget, I've written 2 books on the INFJ where I discuss these topics and more. The Infinite Soul is my latest book, INFJ Life in a Modern World. The key to INFJ flourishing, a meaningful life, a purposeful life, is to embrace your unique INFJ identity, to be authentically INFJ. And yes, the world can be hostile, but this book explores how you can flourish in spite of that, or maybe thanks to that. INFJ growth. This book explores it. The Infinite Soul, first link below. Check the reviews if you want to get even more of a taste for it, as well as the reviews of the prequel, The Ecstatic Soul. A new look at the INFJ personality, which is all about the INFJ mind, what it's like to think like an INFJ. It's the deepest investigation of the INFJ mental makeup and what it is like to be an INFJ, to have an INFJ identity, to think like an INFJ, to be an INFJ. Check it out. And as you can see, of course, the 2 books go very well together, often explore themes in common and have conceptual innovations in common. And don't forget, guys, the lifeblood of my channel is my Patreon page. I could not do it without your support to produce videos every day, quality content, I hope, to provoke your thoughts. You get access to bonus videos every 2 weeks for the community. Recently recorded a half-an-hour in-depth discussion of INFJs and the SE function, to give you an example. Soon we'll probably open up a Discord channel where we can let the community develop even more. You get access to other people there, to me. It's a great place, and again, you massively support me, so consider it, and I'll talk to you next time, guys. Bye-bye.